Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We have a fabulous show for you. Today we are exploring corruption in the prison system with Dr. David Parrish, former warden and clinical psychologist, and Will Congdon, former inmate and now working for network marketing. Welcome, both of you, to the circle.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Today's going to be really interesting. Last time we spoke what Ultramax prison was, a little bit about the life. We got a really brief look at it. But today we're going to look at corruption. And I know both of you have seen a lot of corruption, it seems, inside the prison system. So I wanted to learn a little bit about that. So Dr. Parrish, what's the first thing that stands out for you? Is there really corruption in the prison system?
Well, it's interesting when you say it that way. It's like, is there corruption in the prison system as if there isn't corruption everywhere else? And that's the way it occurs to me, that there's corruption everywhere in our world, that we are... after doing a lot of thinking about this, because corruption is something that I had to deal with in my career. My career was ended early because of corruption. My career, the opportunities I had to do the kind of work that I wanted to were stifled because of corruption. And one of the things that I came to see for myself is that corruption is really an inherent part of the human psyche. And when you think about it, corruption simply means that you're willing to trade something off for something that is self-serving. So it could be trading off doing your job, carrying out your job in a just and decent way with other people, as in the case of a correction officer or a correction official, to do your job the way it's meant to be done, or to do your job to a certain point and then to be willing to trade off somewhere to get paid for something, to get some self-serving thing for, changing your behavior in the direction of getting something for free, doing somebody a favor, and so forth. I think the single most block, the biggest block in this country in terms of what's in the way of having the prison system work is corruption. It's a profit-making business now.
Inside the prison?
Yes. The prison system in this country has gone into private prisons. So now there's money to be made. Prior to that, the politics had a lot to do with what occurred in prisons. And if you look at the political system right now, you never hear it talked about in the news on the federal, state, or local level, because it's a backseat issue. And the way politicians look at it is they don't want to talk about it because it's a polarized issue. Most people are happy that prisons are there. They don't want to see them. They believe in retribution and punishment, and they believe in warehousing human beings. And so what those same people don't realize is that you're creating a monster that is eventually going to be at your door. Because almost everybody that goes to prison will get out. And when they get out with no treatment, embittered by the system, unable to get a job, the tendency and the statistics prove that they commit more violent crimes. So the public's attitude is literally creating a future that is going to be a lot worse than the past.
Now, you mentioned something in part one. We lightly touched on it. Sadism. You were mentioning something about, I don't know if it was the guards or who you were referring to, that it tends to attract those type of personalities. Was it the guards you were referring to? At least the guards you worked with maybe in the past or something.
Yeah, and when I say that, I don't want to make a blanket statement about everybody that works in prisons is sadistic.
Sure.
What I am saying is that over the 32 years that I was in the prison system as a psychologist and as an administrator for 12 years, that I saw a lot of people who had sadistic characteristics. If you're in a position where you, as a personality, you suffer from inadequacy, you suffer from insecurity, and you get people like that many times get jobs where they're given power with the uniform they have on, or they're given power with the authority that comes with the job. And in a prison situation, the inmates are at your mercy. An inmate can be put into cuffs and taken to what they call the hole, isolation lockup. simply because they refuse a direct order. In other words, you could tell them to do anything, and if they refuse to do that, then they get locked up into a deeper and more secure area of the prison. So if you happen to be a sadistic type person, and you say that the inmate refused a direct order, and you say that the inmate threatened you by pushing you or swinging at you, whether that's true or not, right? And in many cases, if there are no witnesses, it doesn't have to be true. Then you have a license to attack that person with force.
So it sounds like there's a lacking of checks and balances.
Well,
if a prison guard says, hey, this guy, I told him to do this, he didn't do it, that's pretty much the word. Nobody else is going to argue against it.
Well, that's one of the reasons that once inmates got legal access and they started to quote the Constitution and the rights that they had to be treated, humanely, then the courts ordered that video cameras be used to videotape any interaction that occurred, the same way that's happening with police now on the street with the video cameras in the cars and the body cameras. That's all supposed to be put in place to protect people from being abused. The only problem with that, going back to corruption, is that when they put those systems in the prisons, which they put in the systems, going back 20 years now, 25 years ago, after the courts got involved. The problem with that is they would turn the cameras off when they wanted to do things that they didn't want to be recorded. So
just turn them off?
Yeah.
Isn't that a little obvious?
Well, it would be obvious to some people and not to others. But it's only the system you have in place is only as good as the people that are supposed to be using the system.
Now, Will, I know he used his talents when he was in there. He was studying to do law in there. Did you defend prisoners in cases like this, where maybe there was abuse and they said, hey, look, well, this guy made me do this. I didn't want to do this, but now I'm in trouble. Were you able to defend those?
Yeah, most of the time I was in prison, I spent my time working in the law libraries, and I was an inmate advocate. So for many of those hearings where there was accused, violence or something like that, well, I could go out and find witnesses and get statements, and sometimes corroborate the inmate's story, and sometimes the statements would corroborate the officer's story. So, there was a lot of corruption, and basically, from the inside point of view, the corruption has been popularized in prison movies and on TV, where we have what we call the snitch system. And so I've had clients who are in the hole and being accused of crimes, and then they would figure out a way that they could trade information and get the charges dismissed. And that was successful also. But the problem with that is because the corruption is so inherently through and through the system that when someone does that, it becomes part of their permanent record. And once the system finds out that you're willing to do that, then they will continue to put more pressure on that particular individual to continue to do that, even when he's done nothing wrong.
They exploit that situation, huh?
Correct, yeah.
That's terrible.
Hello, my name's Matt, and I'm an addict.
My mom was addicted to prescription pills when I was very young, before I even turned 1.
Are you or someone you know struggling with alcohol or drug addiction? Has everyone given up on you or your loved one? The caring staff at Elite Care understands and treats you as a whole person. We offer individual and group therapy, holistic healing such as yoga, nutrition, and spirituality, medication management, and PTSD treatment. By building upon your strengths and rebuilding broken bonds, we help you begin a successful life. With our staff of licensed psychotherapists and doctors, you can be assured of the highest level of care. Elite Care is the best option for long-term rehabilitation from drugs and alcohol. Contact 888-511-0607 for more information.
Now, when you were in there, did you notice any, what kind of corruption did you notice when you were in there? Anything that you saw with the guards, anything you saw with other inmates and the guards?
As I mentioned in part 1, one of the ways you could get a cell transfer would be to request it, but that usually didn't work. You usually had to come up with some other sort of material in order to get that to actually happen, especially when considering that the politics don't end at the prison wall. They continue inside the prison. And there's a lot of, correctional officers. And what they want to do basically is career advancement. They want to move up from the regular officer. They want to become sergeant. They want to become lieutenant. They want to become captain. And all that is politicized. And I even had one person who was the head security officer named, he was the chief. That was the highest rank in the officer corps. When he retired, he told me, he said he couldn't believe the number of prison administrators. They were assistant administrators and people who were superintendents and things like that. And what they wanted most in life was a larger title.
That was it.
And that's what they tried to get.
And they used the prisoners a lot of times to try to advance themselves.
And they did that. And one of the worst cases was I was doing a hearing for an inmate who was accused, and we were in the hole. And we have the hearings in the hole because until he's found not guilty or guilty, you have to stay in the hole. And before the prisoner was actually escorted into the hearing room, the hearing officer just told me, he said, listen, I'm trying to become assistant administrator, and I'm going to find everybody guilty.
And I don't know if you can share this or not for your own safety, but when you were in there, did you ever see, we've heard stories of the prisoners interacting with people outside of the prison, doing activities for them. Here's a little note. Can you rob this person? Can you maybe put a hit on this person? Whatever it may be. Did you see any kind of transactions going on in and out from the outside world to the inside of the prison?
That's common, especially when you're talking about, getting money or putting a hit on somebody like that. That's common mostly in gang transactions. But the idea that, it's public knowledge that there was some 700 or more cell phones confiscated inside the
700?
Yeah.
Wow.
In one California prison. We have a number of California major prisons. But where do those cell phones come from?
Geez, 700.
Has to be employees bringing them in some way or another.
There was a one case, in terms of what you're talking about, there was a psychiatrist who approached an inmate that he recognized was sociopathic, who was in prison for killing a policeman. And he offered him money to have his wife killed.
A psychiatrist?
Yeah. And when he offered him money to have his wife killed, the inmate went to the internal affairs people in the prison and told them that he would wear a wire and interact with the psychiatrist in order to get evidence to arrest him if they would give him, release him to a minimum security work farm instead of the max prison. Okay? So he did that, and he got the evidence. The psychiatrist was arrested, and he was accused of planning the murder of his wife. They allowed the inmate to be released the next day to the minimum security work farm, and he escaped that day from that work farm. And then when he came back, he worked for me. I think the viewers would find this interesting. The same inmate worked for me as an inmate clerk, and he was a very bright sociopath. And he was talking about, is there some program that I could create that would help me get out? And he said, I think the key is working with teenagers. And so over time in our conversations, he came up with this idea of scared straight, bringing teens into the prisons and scaring them. Lo and behold, about a year later, he had been transferred to a medium security prison. I'm watching TV one night, and they're presenting Scared Straight, the documentary, which had won an Academy Award for the best documentary that year. And he was on with the Commissioner of Corrections on television talking about the program. And then I found out, even after having killed a policeman and escaping, that he, because of the friends he made in Hollywood and the pressure they were able to bring politically, was released from prison again.
Released?
Yes. And at that time was touring the country on a speaking tour to high schools to talk to kids about being afraid to go to prison.
Is he still out now?
That's a while back. I don't know if he's, still around at all now.
Well, let me ask you back to that story. I'm speculating here, but is there any corruption anywhere in there? Because the commissioner had an opportunity there. There was probably a chance of a lifetime. And Will mentioned earlier the one gentleman that became chief, and a lot of times they just want that title. Well, that's a title and movie exposure. So that's pretty big.
Yeah. It's like I said before, corruption is the most significant factor in what accounts for the prison system being what it is today. And it's the most significant factor in terms of what will keep the system from moving in a direction where people who are in prison get a fair opportunity to do the work they can do to make the changes in their behavior so that they can be released. Corruption is the biggest issue in the way of all of it.
Now, I got two questions, but the two parts. One's really going to be answered in part 3. The first question is, as a psychologist, you see this corruption, inmates see this corruption. What does that do to them? Does that say, look, the whole world's bad? You know, they just caught me. That's about it. I'm stuck here. But even in here, these guys are bad. Is that ruin? It sounds like it ruins that process of trying to rehabilitate them at all.
Well, it ruins the entire system. I mean, even as an administrator where I was a warden running a prison, you know, I felt a sense of hopelessness. And I felt I became cynical because I felt like I had to deal with the corruption above me. I had to deal with the corruption that I was in the middle of. And so I became a target myself in terms of somebody that couldn't be trusted to keep his mouth shut, or somebody that couldn't be trusted to go along with the way the system wanted things to go, because I cared about human beings. I cared about giving them the opportunity to change. So all the way through the system, I think, and I'm sure it was true for Will too, that at that level, you know, you recognize that it leaves most people with the state of mind that you feel it doesn't matter. You know, there's nothing I can do that's really going to make any difference. And that's part of what the program was that we did to get people out of that state of mind so that they can take hold of their lives and do something to make their lives work in spite of the conditions that exist.
He's a fantastic example.
He's one of many.
Yeah, even within the prison system himself, he was already trying to learn and learn the law system and legal system and use that to his advantage. Now, back to a little bit about the sociopath. We'll touch more a little bit about it in part 3. You've encountered some, obviously, in the Ultramax. It seems like you've encountered some in the Ultramax. How many do you think were in there? Is it a high percentage of the prison inmates that were sociopathic in the Ultramax?
No. Sociopathic personalities are a very small percentage of the number of people in prison. And they're usually people who have committed murders or very heinous sexual crimes related to murders. Many times they're serial murderers. And in the prison system itself, I think the other inmates usually recognize who these people are and stay away from them because they are the kind of person that would not think twice about taking a life. So that's not somebody that you want to cross.
And it's pretty distinct on their personalities.
It's not necessarily distinct on their personalities unless you're really trained in psychology or psychiatry and you really know how to spot a sociopath. You really would find it difficult to detect. A lot of sociopaths who don't commit violent crimes are politicians and people who are billionaires.
You're going to get some phone calls tonight, I think.
Well, it is what it is, you know. I mean, that's the way it is. There are a lot of people who will do anything to get what they want, and they just don't happen to be of the sort that they'll kill people to do it, but there's a lot of other ways to do that. Yeah. So there was one case of a guy who I started working with as a psychologist, and he shared with me that he got arrested for selling marijuana. He was adopted, and all of the sociopaths that I ever worked with, when I went back and researched their history, very violent, horrific, abusive childhoods. I mean, that's always there. This particular guy was adopted. And he said that he was selling marijuana, and his mother found the marijuana and threatened to call the police. And when he was talking to me, just like I'm talking to you, he said, well, I knew what I had to do. I went downstairs and she was this is his mother, in the kitchen. I took the kitchen knife and I grabbed her and cut her throat. And then I rolled her up in the living room rug and waited for a while and watched some television and smoked some pot. And then I went out for dinner at a diner and I put her body in the trunk of the car. And after dinner, I drove around and threw it in a dumpster.
Wow.
And then he said to me, and when I was in court, they talked about me as if I was some kind of violent, cold-blooded killer. I don't understand it.
So he was completely...
That's sociopathy. You know, it's the same thing with the Iceman.
Yeah, we'll get to him in part 3. But before we get there, did you encounter any serial killers or any sociopaths that you were aware of in the prison system? And what did you do about it?
I did, and one of the things that you can count on in the prison yard, although they won't be labeled sociopaths or something like that, because the basic education that is common to most prisoners doesn't really include any kind of therapy terms or anything like that.
Sure.
But mostly you know who it is because you're living with the person and he's in the cell next to you or down the tier. And that type of personality, you'll find that people don't want to cell with that person. And he's going to have a lot of different cell partners.
Really?
That they call them, because people can't stand to be in the same cell with them.
Is it because they're dangerous? Is it because they just have an irritating personality? Or
it's all those things put together. You have to sleep in the same cell with the person, and you have to be able to trust that person, because you're gonna need to sleep. So you can't be in there if you don't trust them.
That's a good point. Very good point. And that's something we'll try to explore a little bit more with Will too, probably in part 3 if we have time, is exploring some of his interactions with these individuals and see what he dealt with there. Well, once again, amazing. The show just flies by. I can't even believe it. Thank you both so much for this wonderful insight. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show as much as I did. Remember, our motto is simple. Wherever there's psychology involved, we are there. Part 3 is coming up. You don't want to miss it. We're going to talk about impact theory, a theory that Dr. Parrish developed that helped, was it 80%?
84, 85%.
Of the inmates that went through the program. Will is one of the classic examples. We look forward to seeing you. Bye, everyone.